Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome back to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
So it feels so good to be back. We have been away for about 2 months, but I have a very good reason for that. I am a daddy. And I am currently holding my brand new 2-month-old son, Theo. Say hi, Theo. He's got the hiccups. Do you want to say hi, bud? Say hi. No? You don't want to talk to the people on the podcast?
Daddy, I haven't developed an Oedipus complex yet.
He loves when I do my Donald Duck impression. Maybe it's because I'm turning him away and he can't see me. Oh.
Yes, definitely the ultimate in father-son bonding.
Oh. Let me tell you, folks, if you don't have children, it's an amazing experience, and my life has been forever changed by this little man.
Yep, just like Odin and Loki. No. I mean, just like Kal-El and Jor. I mean, nope. I mean...
Wow, you're just coming up with all the worst examples.
Well, hey.
Special, incredible thank you to my amazing wife, Kat, who is... just an absolute rock star in the way that she has handled Theo and takes care of him every day since I've gone back to work. And special shout out to her parents and my parents who have come in almost every day and helped out in some fashion or other. They say it takes a village to raise a child. And in our case, we are incredibly fortunate that our village happens to live very, very close by. So he is always... getting to see Grandma and Papu and Nona and Pop, his aunts and uncles and friends all love him very much. That's right, my little man. Yeah. You are so loved. And Uncle Doc loves you too?
That's right.
Uncle Doc came to visit you in the hospital.
Yep.
Oh, you're getting a little fussy. We're recording right now. It's a little before his usual bedtime, but I just wanted... Okay. So my wife is going to go take him and feed him as she has been doing every day for the past 2 months. She has done an amazing job. I love you so much. Thank you for giving me the greatest gift I have ever received. It really is beyond words.
Told you it was going to change your life.
I didn't doubt you. I absolutely did not doubt you. I mean, I spontaneously cry sometimes when I'm holding him or just taking care of him. It's absolutely incredible. And if you want to see pictures and videos, you can go to my Instagram at Anthony Sitko. And that's basically, he's taken over my feed for the past 2 months, understandably so. And I think I put one picture up on the official Capes Instagram account, but for the most part, I'd like to keep them a little separated. But he's just... He's my little teddy bear. He's my little son. He's my son. And it's still 2 months in and it still feels amazing and pants-shittingly terrifying and incredible. All of the emotions, absolutely all of the emotions whenever I look at him. It's unreal.
That's amazing, man. Absolutely amazing. I can't say I've done anything as dramatic as that. I've simply gone on a vacation, recharged my batteries, found out that I had to work harder than I have in a little while because half of my workforce was gone. And no, that's not an Avengers reference. We had some changes in the work schedule.
Are you sure, though?
Well, I did have to counsel some people about grief and loss and how to move forward. And
did you have to at anybody?
No, not in the slightest. I did get to see the movie way later than everyone else, but it was worth it. And I do my best not to exaggerate, but that was one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
So
I got into an argument with the owner of my local comic shop the other day because he said it's not bad, but it's no Infinity War. And he said, you can love the movie and still acknowledge that there are bad things about it. He said well, I don't want to get into spoilers. I don't want to potentially ruin this for anybody, even for a movie that's been out for 2 months, because I did see it on opening night. And then I saw it again. I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I cried, I screamed, I cheered. I managed to hold my bladder for the 3 hours, both times. No, I'm sorry. The second time I did step out, but I had seen it already and I wanted snacks. I was hungry. So.
Right. And although we are comics based, I would highly recommend Popcorn Psychology's take on it, because that movie gave so much psychological fodder for discussion, and how well done many of those parts are in terms of character development.
Yes, absolutely. So we've mentioned our friends at Popcorn Psychology numerous times. I actually recorded a guest spot on there, my second guest spot on there, for an episode on The Empire Strikes Back, which is my favorite film of all time. And that one will be coming out sometime in June or July. So you can follow them at popcorn_psych on Twitter. And I believe it's Popcorn Psychology on Instagram. But you can check them out. They are good friends of the show. And many thanks to Ben, Hannah, and Brittany for letting me appear on, even though I am technically not a licensed therapist or mental health professional anyway. I'm just someone who really, really loves that movie. So segue, I think that's actually sort of a perfect segue to talk about not only psychological issues, but also parenthood. Today's episode is a very, very special one. This is our 45th episode, which side note, oh my God, 45 episodes already. But this episode is about Nadia Van Dyne, born Nadia Pym. Now, why is this a very, very special episode? Not just because it's our season 3 premiere, but because for the first time ever, we are going to have a creator interview. That's right. We are going to be talking with Jeremy Whitley, who has written the last 2 volumes of The Unstoppable Wasp, starring Nadia Van Dyne, and a discussion and analysis of her mental health issues. And this also gives us an opportunity to look back on our episode on Hank, who we've previously covered. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here that we're very, very excited about. Side note, there will be no skit on this episode. Because we chose to focus, first off, we chose to focus primarily on the interview with Jeremy. And secondly, and we'll get into this when we sit down and actually talk with Jeremy, if you read the book, Nadia is undergoing every treatment option that we would suggest for her. So we kind of felt that it was reductive to offer treatment options for someone who's literally doing everything that they're supposed to.
Right. And full disclosure, I was late to the game on this until Anthony mentioned to me that we were going to be doing this character. I hadn't read anything about it, so I picked it up from there. Once I did that, I was incredibly impressed by the appropriate depiction of bipolar disorder, specifically the manic episode. I was impressed with what they were trying to do with regards to treatment. And I was impressed by the writing overall, that it induced the proper responses to everyone involved and how many people respond to these situations if they're either seeing it for the first time or once everyone's on board with the idea that something needs to be addressed, how people could take different angles towards addressing it. So I'm thrilled to be able to talk to a person that clearly has an understanding of what mental health is all about. Even if it's not from a quote unquote professional standpoint, you don't need a profession to be a person. And that's what comes across with Nadia Van Dyne.
Absolutely. I cried multiple times reading this book. It's currently, I think, issue 8 of volume 2 just came out. There are 2 more issues left as of this recording in the current volume to come out. And it's a shame that they can't seem to get any long running legs under them. I think the first volume was canceled after 8 issues, and this one is canceled after 10. It was brought back because it didn't sell well monthly, but the trade sales went through the roof. And I could go on a whole tangent on how the notion of trade waiting really, really bothers me, because I feel that it undercuts the industry. And it forces creators to not only come up with stories in those 6 to 12 issue bites, but also if you're waiting until the trade comes out, then the book never really gets an opportunity to find its legs, because the monthly sales aren't there to keep the book buoyant enough to get the long-term trades. I don't have a problem years down the line. If you want to buy the trades, that's all well and good. I buy floppies every week or every 2 weeks. I'm at my store. I have a pull list because I keep the runs that I love going. And in any case, I strongly urge you to go out and buy the trades of the first volume, go out and buy the last 2 issues as they come out, and buy the trades for Unstoppable Wasp. So real quick, we're going to go into the background before we sit down and talk with Jeremy. We're going to get into the background of the character. So Nadia Van Dyne was created by Mark Waid and Alan Davis in Free Comic Book Day 2016 Civil War II in July of 2016. So that was the Free Comic Book Day giveaway comic that was going to promote the upcoming Civil War II event. So she was the daughter of Hank Pym and his first wife, Maria Trovaya. Maria was abducted and killed by foreign agents, but before she was abducted and killed, or before she was killed rather, Nadia was born and then was raised in the Red Room by the Soviet scientists as an assassin until they discovered, your father is Hank Pym. You probably have his aptitude for science as well, because comics. And they placed her in a science program to take advantage of her genetic aptitude. She reverse engineered some Pym particles and escaped because she wanted to meet her father. And then she arrives in America and discovers he's dead. Well, as dead as comics can be.
Right. I was going to say there are so many asterisks in all of this at this point, but keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah. Pymtron, whatever you want to call him.
Check out our Hank Pym episode if you want to learn a little bit more about how wacky this gets.
Yeah, it gets a little nutty. So she creates a new wasp suit to honor her father's memory. She joins the Avengers and becomes a U.S. citizen. When she becomes a U.S. citizen, they ask her last name. She said, technically it's Pym, but she doesn't have any real connection to Hank. Meanwhile, she has met up with Janet and befriended Janet Van Dyne, who has sort of taken her under her wing, no pun intended, I swear, to teach her about all superhero-dom and what being a young woman is like. Because Janet loved Hank so much and knew who he was, she saw an opportunity to bond with Nadia over that. And so when they asked Nadia, what is your legal last name? She says, I would like to be known as Nadia Van Dyne. So she takes Janet's last name. Meanwhile, she also creates Genius in Action Research Labs, the acronym GIRL, to recruit young women with science backgrounds. And there are a number of characters that Nadia recruits to join her to foster STEM research and to have a positive impact on science. She really wants to focus on the scientific aspect of things.
Right. I think it was because of the SHIELD rank list. I'm trying to remember specifically. It was, the bottom line is some major agency was ranking characters like heroes as to how intelligent or how important they were to the scientific community. And she noticed that the first female that shows up on the list is way down there.
I think it's 27. Like the first woman on the list is 27.
Okay.
And then she meets Moon Girl, who is now the smartest person in the world. Right. So they had to redo the list.
Right.
And she just gets super Genki girl excited over the notion that there are other science-minded young women out there. And she says, I need to recruit all of you and bring you together. And so she creates this think tank where they bring together women from various scientific, there's bioengineering and there's mechanical engineering and genetics, and there's all chemistry. And so it really runs the gamut. And we're going to talk to Jeremy as well about the well-rounded female characters that he has written, and diverse as the day is long. And it's really, I cannot say enough great things about this book. And I mentioned this to you, Doc. I know you have a young daughter. If you have a young daughter, they should be reading this book. At the end of every issue, Jeremy has an interview with an actual woman scientist, and he talks to them about what inspires them in their line of work, how they got started, how they want to expand representation for women in scientific fields, and obviously also what comics do you like to read. So
Definitely worth it.
like I said, I'm not just saying this because we're interviewing Jeremy, but I really, really connected with this book and this character in a way that I did not initially foresee when we started. So on that note, I guess let's just cut right to the chase and let's set up our interview with Jeremy. All right, so we are here with Jeremy Whitley, author of The Unstoppable Wasp. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So before we get started, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you and some of the work that you've done, some of your current projects, where they can find you on social media, et cetera.
Well, on social media, I'm on Twitter. I'm JRome58, so JROME58. That's probably where I am the most. I still have a lot of presence on Tumblr, even though that's slowly dying. And that one is princelesscomic.tumblr.com. Which I guess kind of leads in neatly to the and how I got started part of things. I'm a comics writer. I started out doing creator-owned stuff, specifically my creator-owned series Princeless, which is about a princess who is locked in a tower by her evil parents to wait for a handsome prince to come rescue her. Instead of waiting around, she decides to save herself. So teams up with her guardian dragon to go save her sisters, who are all similarly locked up. So I'd been doing that for a couple of years, along with the spin-off to that series, which is called Raven the Pirate Princess. I got some gigs doing, work for hire stuff. I started out doing stuff for IDW, a lot of which is My Little Pony stuff. I've done some stuff for Dynamite. But recently, I've been doing a lot of stuff for both Titan and for Marvel Comics. In Marvel, I started out doing a couple of shorter stories here and there, in anthologies around around big events and things like that, and then got a couple little one shots here and there, and then the first run of Unstoppable Wasp was actually my first ongoing series that I ever did, and that ran about 8 issues, and then since then we're in the middle of the second run right now. And then I've also done Thor versus Hulk, Champions of the Universe, which is a fun, Comixology original, which is collected in trade now. And then get to do I've done a lot of cool stuff, like I get to co-write a couple issues of Avengers with Mark Waid, and get to do some Champions and a little bit of everything bouncing around the Marvel Universe.
Yeah, I actually really liked the Civil War choosing sides that you did, because I am a huge Moon Knight fan. So, and I collect literally anything and everything Moon Knight related. So when I saw the Moon Knight, I said, "Oh, I have to get this." So I actually really dug that little story that you did there.
Yeah, it's a really neat opportunity. I think it's a lot of people have a lot to say about the sort of bloat around events and stuff like that. And I think, books like that, even though they're not, 100% absolutely necessary, I think give, companies like Marvel a chance to try out new writers and new artists and sort of see what they can do without not having to, bet the house on them or anything. And it's a cool opportunity to get in and be like, all right, here's all these characters that you would dream about writing. Tell us what you would do, and just do that for 8 pages.
Yeah. Now, segueing into that then, or segueing from that into Unstoppable Wasp, how did you end up coming to write Unstoppable Wasp? Was that a decision where you said, I want to write about this character, or were you assigned Nadia from Marvel?
So I'd been sort of hassling Tom Brevoort, who had been the executive editor on a couple of the short stories I'd done about doing something bigger, doing something ongoing over there. Nothing had come to pass at that point until they were looking to do a story with this character, especially with the Wasp making her premiere in the movies around the same time that that first one was coming out. They were looking to do something, and they weren't really sure what they wanted to do. And Tom was familiar with my work, and I know for a fact that Mark Waid, who was familiar with my work as well, sort of thought I would be a good fit and recommended me for that. And they sort of said, here's the deal. At this point, she's only really appeared in the Free Comic Book Day story where she was introduced, and then like 3 issues of Avengers, and mostly sort of as a backup. So there's not a lot established about her and what her deal is, where she's going, other than sort of the background of who she is and how she got here. So if we gave you this character and gave you the option to do a story with her, what would you do? And what I ended up bringing to them was very much what's in that first volume. The idea of her, deciding to set up her own lab and recruiting, new young scientists, and sort of mixing that in with the intrigue of the Red Room, and sort of solving some of the issues around her past and her immigration and everything like that. That's sort of how I got into it. Is I pitched that, and we sort of went through a few versions of refining that. And eventually, I wrote the first issue of that and sent it in to my editors, and I sent a copy to Mark, because at that point he was the only one who'd written the character. He was the one who created her. And it was really nice, because not only was he overwhelmingly positive about it, but he ended up inviting me to co-write an issue of Avengers with him that was going to focus on Nadia and Janet. So I got to sort of write the intro to my own book in Avengers, hand in hand with Mark Waid, which is not a bad way to work on anything.
True that. So how much leeway? So you said you came up with the idea for the story. How much leeway did you have in determining the character arc in terms of bringing in Janet and Bobby, who are the established characters that you really focus that first volume around, and Jarvis as well, I should add. And I really like Jarvis's role in the first volume a lot. But everybody else is largely brand new characters. But the established characters, like I said, Bobby and Janet and Jarvis, how much leeway did you have in what you could do with them compared to what was happening with them in the other books?
I think the nice thing, and that it's also sort of a negative, is that Janet and Bobby weren't up to much at that point. I think they're great characters. I think they should always be in comics doing something. There wasn't too much going on with either of them. I mean, Janet was in Uncanny Avengers, which was a big team full of characters at that point, from both X-Men and Avengers. And then Bobby's book, the Mockingbird series, had just ended a little while before that. So they were both kind of free to do what I wanted to do with them. I think the biggest thing they steered me on with using existing characters was to steer me away from loading the book up with existing characters and making it, not Nadia's book, which I think was a very good note on the part of my editors coming in, where, I sort of pitched this idea of putting together this lab of characters, and I was like, well, what if we use all these existing characters and pull from, these 10 and 20-year-old stories, have characters from Avengers Academy and things like that in there. And they sort of wisely advised me to create, some newer, younger characters, and to build it more around Nadia and to have her be the center of it, because it is, after all, her book. I think the biggest advice I had on Janet was to sort of wait on having Janet, be a major part of the book until later in the story, because she does have very much an established fan base, and it would be very easy writing that book for it to very quickly become a Janet-centered book. And as much as she's a great character, that wasn't really what they wanted.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. I'm definitely grateful that you were able to have the opportunity to really strike out on your own with some of these characters, and you do an excellent job. Now, I'll admit, I'm going to take kind of a clinical slant here because I'm a psychiatrist. So I just have to ask you, when I was reading the book, which Anthony introduced me to, I was absolutely stunned and floored in a good way about the portrayal with Nadia with bipolar disorder. I mean, I have to ask you, like, what inspired you to write something like that? Did you do any extra research in terms of the portrayal, or is there a personal experience involved with that? Because it's incredibly well done, like the whole manic episode, stuff like that. I'm very curious as to how you got into that realm with a character like that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, first of all. It is something I did quite a bit of research on. I mean, I think the sort of start at the beginning of answering that is it was something that we had talked about early on, even in the first volume, was potentially doing something with the fact that Hank has sort of in the past self-diagnosed himself with bipolar disorder, and that I think we established in the first volume that part of the problem is not so much that Hank, or part of the issue between Hank and Janet is not so much that Hank has bipolar disorder, but that he has undiagnosed, self-treated bipolar disorder that he refuses to actually do anything about other than to attempt to control it himself, which has not gone well for him. And so, that was something we had talked about early on. Is that bipolar disorder is often hereditary, and that would be an interesting thing to do with Nadia, especially since so many portrayals of mental illness in superhero stories are framed so negatively, and are very rarely younger characters or characters who are hopeful in any way. And that Nadia is such a young, exciting, hopeful character that it gave us an opportunity to do a story about mental illness that is in a lot of ways one of the first sort of 20th century versions of a mental illness story in superhero comics. That was an interesting idea to us. In the first volume, we didn't end up having the space to do all the introductory arc stuff that we did and still be able to do that story, and we didn't want it to be sort of the first story. So when the book got brought back for the second run, I thought this is something we absolutely have to do. Because I was told when we came back by Tom Brevoort, he was like, now that nothing is promised, so if there's a story you want to tell, make sure that you tell it now. I was like, all right, so this is what we're going to do. But I was absolutely determined to do it well and right, because I think it's so rare that anything around mental illness is portrayed correctly or with any sort of sympathy in comics. And that was something I wanted to make sure to get right, because I do have friends who deal both with bipolar disorder and just generalized anxiety, and have struggled with getting treatment or getting diagnosed or even admitting that they have any sort of issue, because it is so stigmatized and so not talked about in any sort of real sense. I wanted to make sure that we have some obligation to make things the sort of grand superheroic scale that they have to be in Marvel Comics, that we dealt with this in a very real and human kind of way too. So I think you'll notice, especially in issues 4 and 5, there are a lot of special things. And I talked to everybody from my friend Matthew Connor, who is a psychologist himself, to I think you'll see in the end of issue 5, our agent of girl that we interviewed is an actual professor of psychology,
right?
Chris, who's amazing. And then I also talked with a bunch of friends who also read the scripts early on, who either deal with bipolar disorder themselves or have friends and family who deal with it, because I wanted to make sure to get not just Nadia's perspective correct on that of dealing with this manic episode, but also I wanted everybody's reactions to feel real, because I think that's a tendency that we have when we want to tell a positive version of the story, is for everybody's reactions to be excited and rosy, and like that's not the way that it happens when stuff like this happens in your life. As some people have different reactions, and some people have in especially like Taina's case in this story, she has a justified negative reaction to Nadia.
Right.
Yeah, you're trying to fix me. Who the hell do you think you are?
Yeah.
Which, yeah, it's one of those things that like I had readers come back like after reading issue 4 and be like, "Hey, this is real up. Are you guys gonna deal with this? Because like you really need to deal with that." And I was like, "Oh yeah, like we are totally aware that that's a messed up thing for Nadia to do. Like we're gonna come back to that. Don't worry."
Right. Right. That's one of those examples where you have to kind of trust the writer on this, because it's clear that you did your homework. Ironically, I just have to mention a plug for our own show. We did an episode on Hank Pym, episode 17 of our podcast, discussing that whole bipolar piece and a few other things from different story arcs related to him, and the way that you described that with Hank, as well as your overall description of trying to destigmatize mental illness and getting it right. That's pretty much why this podcast exists. So the fact that you wrote and are continuing to write such an interesting character and dynamic with so many other characters and how they're responding to it, that's what made us so interested in talking to you in the first place. And I must say, I'm a huge comic fan myself. So this really captured an illness better than just about anything else I've read. And that's why it's so clear you did the due diligence, and I commend you for that.
Yeah, we have done, like, this is episode number 45 for us. We have never done a character whose struggles with mental illness have been so accurate to reality as Nadia. And reading it, I cried a couple of times, just for various purposes, just the emotional resonance of the various the various issues, but the way in which not only the onset of the manic episode, but then the following the manic with the depression, and the way that her entire support system came around her and reacted. As you said, Taina didn't exactly have the best reaction. Some characters were a little better. I really liked Janet's whole internal struggles with everything, where she wasn't quite sure exactly what to do. And then she said, I have my own stuff to deal with, but I have to put that aside because I need to be there for Nadia. And it was giving her a lot of flashbacks to what she dealt with Hank. I thought the entire setup was just masterfully done, and I'm serious that we're not just blowing smoke because we're talking to you, but that we are sincere when we say that this is one of the most realistic and accurate portrayals of mental illness that we've ever seen in comics. And as Doc said, that's one of the things that got us starting the show is so many characters that said, well, they have such and such, but they're written in a way that it's the Hollywood version. You don't do the
split personality, cough.
Exactly. Yeah. Split personality, multiple personality disorder. You write it in a way that maintains the level of drama for storytelling purposes, while not sacrificing the reality of what it is that Nadia and her friends are going through. And that is not an easy task. And it shows just how well received the run has been.
I do have kind of a follow-up question to all of this. And that's the fact that, you weren't just developing Nadia as a character. You had a cast of characters that you pretty much had to truly develop from the ground up with this type of material. And I think it would be interesting to hear about how you managed to do all of that, because at least from what I've understood, many writers get the opportunity, fine, you get a main character, but here's the other cast that you deal with, and let's see what you come up with. In this case, they really did give you a little more free reign to use other people as well and develop them for yourself. So I really wanted to hear about that, especially when it comes to this whole, what appears to be a driving force of talking about strong female characters overall. And I'm not just talking about Unstoppable Wasp. I'm talking about the other work that you've done. You mentioned some of the other things that you've written. It seems like writing strong and independent female characters is something that, in a way, has become your specialty. So I wondered if you could speak about that.
I think especially with Princeless, I've been on a lot of like panels and uh, interviews talking about um, strong female characters, and I think something I've come to like first realize and then sort of proselytize in this way is that like the strong part of that like doesn't necessarily have to refer to like the female part of that so much as the character, like that the character is well developed and is uh, well put together, and not just that it is a woman who has muscles. And I think that's in a lot of cases what's missing from a lot of like comic stories, especially those written by guys, is that they're like, all right, well, this lady in the uh, bikini made of metal, like she's very strong, so obviously I have a strong woman in my story.
Mm.
When really they've just created a guy in a bathing suit with boobs, and it's a question of like really like developing and fleshing out characters in a way that like they have internal lives and they're doing stuff when they're not on the panel, and like you understand who these people are outside of just the function they serve on the pages. And I mean that's always important to me, because like there's never a question with that about like Batman or Superman. Like you always know what those guys are up to when they're not on the page. But unfortunately, I do think there's a tendency for people to like just forget about Lois Lane for 6 months at a time. My pet example is my first story I did at Marvel was this Misty Knight and Danny Rand story. I'm always talking about Misty Knight and the fact that like we know everything there is to know about Danny Rand's family and Danny Rand's past and how he got his powers and where he comes from and all the minutia of who he is. But like we don't know if Misty Knight has a mom, like if her mother is alive, where she is, like anything about her parents at all, other than like there's an occasional reference in the Palmiotti Grey Daughters of the Dragon that Misty's dad was a cop, and that's all we know about Misty Knight. So like she doesn't have this previous life or anything that's going on when she's not actually right there on the page. She just is sort of frozen in carbonite for 6 months to a year until the next time she appears in a comic. That's a problem, and it's something that I try to think about when I'm creating characters and when I'm writing other characters. I loved there's this whole sequence in issue 7 of the first volume of Unstoppable Wasp where it's just like it's the beginning of this story that's told from Janet's perspective, and it just sort of goes through like her trying to go to sleep and what like a day in the life is like for Janet Van Dyne, which is an infinitely like fascinating idea for me, because there's so much going on in her life, and the idea of being somebody who's been an Avenger for as long as she has, and just like how
literally since day one,
get to sleep at the end of the night.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and just such a wonderful, diverse group of young girls. I mean, Taina, Ying, Shay, etc. I feel like I want to be friends with all of them, and yet when I read this, I feel I'm not cool enough to be friends with them. I'm not smart enough to be friends with these girls. And it would be, just never mind the optics of, 37-year-old guy wanting to be friends with these young girls, but just the way that they interact with each other. And it feels so real. And I also appreciated that Nadia's recruitment, you knew eventually, obviously, she was going to end up recruiting these girls, but it wasn't always just hey, I want to recruit you. Okay. And now we're best friends. Like it felt organic, and it really felt earned over the course of both volumes, and everything that happened with the girl and the agents of girl, I guess, so to speak. And like I said, just, reading this as a 37-year-old cis hetero white male reading the trials and tribulations of these young, diverse women from across various ethnic backgrounds, across the sexual spectrum. I felt very connected to them on just a personal level, and that's good writing. That's a credit to you to be able to create these wonderful characters that have resonated beyond just what's Nadia doing. That, when Nadia's not on the panel, all the characters should be standing around saying, well, where's Nadia? Like a Poochie reference.
Oh, God.
But what you created, as Doc was saying, you created these well-rounded characters, and it was a joy to read. So that is something that I have not yet read Princeless, but I'm definitely going to, just because of how well you've written Unstoppable Wasp. So I will be adding that to my list.
With the other girls, like it was an important thing to me to like plant stuff in there that I'd be able to use later, and I think it was kind of frustrating when the first series ended that there were things that I didn't get to pull out that I had sort of planted the seeds for, and that makes it all the more kind of glorious 2 years later when I'm on this next series, and like the whole thing with Priya and her brother. There's a line that almost seems like a throwaway line in the first volume of her being mentioning her brother as having been really into medicine and have been this sort of being into science the way that she is sort of afraid of being into science. And like we never really get to talk about her brother in that story, but then that ends up becoming such an important part of issue 5 of this volume, where she gets to come to Nadia and say, look, like my brother committed suicide because like he had these problems and didn't tell anybody about him, and nobody was there for him, and like I can't let that happen.
Yeah, it was, as someone who personally struggled with suicidal depression for a time, it was very, very powerful for me to read that part. That was definitely one of the times that I cried while reading that, because I felt so badly for Nadia, because I empathized with her brother in that sense of going through so much and not wanting to tell anybody because you don't want to burden anybody else. So you put on that facade. And, I likened it in a previous blog post on our Capes on the Couch website to a recurring comic book villain, that my depression is the villain that you think they're defeated, but then they come back, when the hero is down. And so that's something that I continue to struggle with, on a semi-regular basis. And so I really, really empathize with Priya and her story about her brother at that point, and that was just a really powerful moment. So that was incredible. Going back to Nadia, your discussion of her treatment and everything that she's doing after issues 4 and 5 to cope with it, the medication and the therapy and everything, was that something else that came out of your research with the mental health professionals? Because that is very realistically portrayed.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely something that I felt was like just important to get right, as the actual issues with bipolar disorder is where you go from there, because I feel like it's a very comics thing to do, to be like, all right, we beat it, we're done, right. Bipolar disorder is defeated, let's all go home and celebrate now. But like that's not how mental health works. Like, and certainly not how mental illness works. You can't just be done. You have to be vigilant. You have to take steps. You have to keep going. And like that was something I wanted to make sure we were able to give the space to, despite knowing we had a limited amount of space at that point. Because I wanted to make sure that we showed Nadia in therapy, that we referenced her, dealing with these things through medication and through therapy, and having a support system, and that, you know, she does take the time to like go back and reconcile with Taina, who, you know, she's hurt during her manic episode. And that, you know, these discussions are had on panel, and not something that we can just be like, oh well, you know, we assume at some point things got better, because like that's, I mean, I feel like at some level, like that's the real heroism of this story is not, you know, the punching of bad guys, but like the ability to like ask for help and to move forward and to admit that you were wrong, and to seek a way to get better, is much more difficult and much more heroic than just saying like, oh well, these evil science guys are obviously bad, let's punch them.
Right. It's a lot more nuanced rather than just writing a POW panel, which actually I do have a question related to that, because obviously you're doing the writing and this is still a graphic art form. So when you have certain artists that you're working with, inkers, all those things, what was their take on all of this? Because it's known that there are some artists who have no problem with lots of dialogue, and there are some artists where, you know, they need the splashy pages. So I'm curious as to, you know, how they responded to a story arc like this, and this is what they're responsible for.
You know, it's an interesting question, because I can't be 100% certain, because Gurihiro, who do the art on, you know, they do 1 through 5, and then are doing 8 through 10 as well. They're Japanese. They work through a translator, so everything I get is sort of secondhand. But everything seems to be like they're very excited and very positive about, you know, having the chance to do a story that's very different, and they're also very excited about working with the cast that's so predominantly female. And they do such an amazing job of doing work in, you know, panels that are to some extent, or could just be talking heads. You know, that whole sequence with Nadia and Priya in the Crystal Lab could just be a series of you know, real mediocre 3/4 headshots, and, you know, back and forth. But like, there's so much emotion illustrated into their faces and into their body language, and there's so much detail put into, you know, the sort of atmosphere of those pages, that like, there's no way, I feel like there's no way you could look at that book and be like, nothing exciting happens in this book. Like, right. Nobody gets punched. It's clearly not a comic. Just, yeah, like everything they do so well. Like, you would never know that, you know, everything is going, you know, through a translator, going through, you know, multiple languages at that point. And you know, the two of them work as a team, and they do so just seamlessly. They're so very good at what they do. And you know, even issues 6 and 7, which are you know, a different illustrator in Alti Firmancia, who's again not American, doesn't deal through a translator. She's, you know, speaks English, but you know, still, you know, we're going across the Pacific Ocean again. You know, there's still so much like detail and emotion and stuff put into those pages, and you know, especially, I mean, 6 and 7 are very, I think, low action, emotion heavy stories between, you know, Nadia's birthday party, and then, you know, 6 having so much to do with reconciliation, and then, you know, Ying's coming out. It's not like, they're certainly not punching heavy pages.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I also thought that Ying's coming out and the whole confrontation that she had with Shay's mom was fantastic. Really just sort of sit down and shut up, and, you know, I'm umpteen different ways to kill you, and the waiter wouldn't even realize what was going on. I thought it was their relationship is just, it's fantastic. I absolutely adore the whole dynamic that they have. And another thing I was going to add, and I forgot to mention this earlier, is one of the things that we do at the end, towards the end of every episode, when we're covering a character, is we discuss what treatment options are available for them and how would we treat them. And then we do a little fun skit where I role play the patient, quote unquote, and Doc handles, the therapy, and we handle it. We treat it. It's slightly humorous, but we handle it as though we're an actual therapy session with the patient. Your writing has rendered the therapy discussion or the treatment discussion completely moot, because everything you've written is exactly what would be happening. And so Doc and I, not just because we're having the interview and that's taken up the bulk of the episode, but when Doc and I were discussing how to do this, we said, well, we're not going to do a skit because it's going to be way out of left field after this. And also everything we would suggest for treatment, or everything Doc would suggest for treatment, Nadia's already doing. So it felt reductive. So that's, again, a credit to you for sort of doing our job for us. So that's sort of, when we were covering how we're going to cover Nadia, well, we don't have to cover treatment because she's medicating. She's on medication. She's she's going to therapy. She's addressing the issues with her friends. Yep. So
yeah, that's
you did our job for us.
Great to hear. Cause I think, if it had been up to me and I had just like, an infinite amount of time and room to like be able to do everything, I feel like I would have loved to have dedicated more space to just therapy stuff, because I think we get to touch on it ever so briefly in issue 6, and I feel like I got the benefit of basically stealing Silk's psychiatrist. I don't know if you guys have read any of Silk, but like, the psychiatrist that we use in that story is stolen directly from Silk, where she had her own psychiatrist that specializes in superhero stuff that was part of that story. And I was like, when we were figuring out what we wanted to do, I was like, I already had Matt Murdock as Nadia's attorney in one section, which only made very limited sense for what he was actually doing. I was like, I want somebody who's an established psychologist in the Marvel universe, but I certainly don't want like a Doc Samson or
I was literally just about to say Doc is a huge fan of Doc Samson.
Yeah, huge Doc Samson fan. So I'm glad. I can certainly understand why you wouldn't choose him.
There's not only is there a lot of like questionable stuff with him personally, but there's also just there's that issue of X Factor where he just diagnoses everybody and all of his diagnoses are terrible.
Yep. Yep, I know exactly. I know exactly the run you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah, I'm just like, who is this guy? Like, the idea that they do the whole issue around therapy, and then like just like the end, it's a very kind of ending. Is I don't know. It was definitely not what I wanted to go for.
Right. I think you summarized the way Doc Samson is usually handled, and that's why on my Twitter account it's Doc Samson is my hero. Not necessarily. It's kind of tongue in cheek. It's basically the point that this is what people think about. I'm like, well, if I could have green hair or whatever, and basically be able to just do what I want at any time, and if that doesn't work, I could still find ways to physically attack them and do what I want. Then hey, cool. That makes my job a lot simpler. No. But that's the point. The reality of therapy basically being, two people having conversations and having discussions that hopefully, yield better results for the person in the long run. But that person recognizing that they have to do work themselves. And this is more of a guided tour as opposed to, all right, this is what you do. All right, good. You got it. This is what I'm telling you is wrong. And you're done. All right, great. We fixed it. Yay.
I mean, what I wanted to do is literally like lay out for Nadia this moment where she has this Hank Pym compulsion to say, "Oh, but I can fix it. I have bipolar disorder, but I can fix it." But she has her psychiatrist and she has Janet in the room with her at that moment, and she says, "You think you can fix it, and why do you feel like you can fix it? Well, you feel like you can fix it because your bipolar disorder is telling you can fix it." Okay. And like, that's exactly what you have to step back from. It's like, oh, okay, like that's the moment that Hank has never had in the comics, is somebody that, is able to step in at that moment and go, is experimenting on yourself really the best way to handle this? Like, it's just going full on Frankenstein. Is that how you want to go about this? It's, but that's, I wanted to be able to kind of have that moment and be like, all right, this is a moment where she could have gone, the way Hank does, and this is the difference. Because I feel like in issue 5, and well, especially in issue 5, where there's the fight and there's some amount of punching and throwing, I think it's very easy for people, and I have seen people online read that issue and go, well, how is she any better than Hank? Like, obviously she's just like Hank now. And it's like, well, it's not about, whether the first time you experience your mental illness, you don't know exactly what to do. It's about whether after that you're able to accept help and do something about it.
Right.
Exactly. It's not about the initial action. It's about how you cope with it and how you deal with it moving forward, which Hank, and we discussed that in our episode on Hank, he never really did. It was always just, he felt that if he continued to immerse himself in his work or just throw himself into science, that it would eventually, quote unquote, fix him. And he never got that. And that's why he ended up, merged with Ultron. But it was really refreshing to see Nadia not repeat the same mistakes that her father made. And especially when she grappled with the whole thing, when she has that conversation with Janet, like, he hit you though. And we go into that episode, that issue, at length in the Hank episode, that one instance of domestic violence that, for better or worse, has come to sort of define Hank Pym moving forward, that she grapples with that. And she was asking Janet, like, how could you deal with it? Because at that point she still had Hank up on a pedestal in her mind. And then to see that, to hear about that and everything, really sort of, I don't want to say broke Hank in her mind, but definitely brought him down from the godlike stature that she had. And I thought that was a fascinating and very well done conversation. And I was wondering if at any point that, when I was reading prior to that, I was wondering if the hit or the slap was going to be brought up and how that was going to be handled. And I thought it was done incredibly well.
Yeah, I think up until, the stuff about Nadia's bipolar disorder in issue 4 and 5, those like 2 pages about Hank hitting Janet are the most time I've spent just like fine-tuning dialogue and then running it past people and fine-tuning it again, because I think it's so weirdly telling that is a point that is discussed so much among comic fans and in comics, and that as I was like writing that, I couldn't think of an instance where like Janet actually talked about it, where like it's always talked about either by a third party or by Hank. And it's like such a defining thing for Hank, but like it's also, this very big moment in Janet's life. And like, as somebody who, was abused, like she never is given a platform to talk about her abuse and about dealing with that. And I felt like that was a very important thing to do and to get right there, because it is such a loaded thing, especially when it comes to that relationship. And then, the sort of eternal question of like, why is that a thing that stuck for Hank Pym and has not stuck for so many other characters who have at some point, hit either their significant other or somebody who was important to them. That's everybody from Peter Parker to Reed Richards has had some sort of, close call to that. But like Hank is the guy that people are like, oh yeah, that's the guy that hit his wife.
He's the wife beater. Exactly.
Yeah. I think to, actually examine that from Janet's point of view and to talk about what it is that makes it different. And that, that they do end up together for a while and then end up apart again. In Janet's mind, what would be the reasoning for that is that, oh, well, it is something that to some extent he can't control, but then he doesn't make any attempt to change or to control what he can control. So, at that point, as a person, you have to say, all right, this is not my responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not my responsibility to make this person change who they are, and I have to at some point live my life. So that was a big deal moment for me is to make that sort of thread the needle of continuity and work out in a way that made sense.
All right.
Absolutely, and it definitely comes across the time and care that you put into tweaking the dialogue in that sequence, and you very much get what Janet is going through, and the art as well, obviously, with the expressions on her face and just the body language and stuff. And so much is said and equally not said in that brief conversation. That again, very, very well done. So my next question is, obviously we have, I think, 2 more issues left of this current run. I wish it was 202 because I could continue to read this for a very, very long time. Sadly, there are only 2 issues left. What is next for Nadia? And then what is next for Jeremy Whitley, the writer? What projects are you working on? What do you have coming up in the works? I believe you're doing, well, I'll let you talk about it then. But what's next for Nadia and what's next for you?
Well, this current storyline we're doing started with issue 8 and we'll wrap up with 10, which is all about the Girl Expo, which is this thing that they've been sort of building toward of actually being able to show off and demonstrate all the projects they've been working on. So it's not just our girls, but a variety of other young scientists who sort of have had this opportunity thanks to Nadia and Janet and all these folks to come together and have this expo at this is very clearly at the Javits Center.
Yeah, definitely is.
Yeah, anybody who's been to New York Comic Con will immediately recognize the Jacob Javits Center. Mm-hmm. I was like, well, it has to be. It's in New York. Where would you be able to have this much expo space in New York? There's really only a couple of options. And the idea of setting a comic book story in the Javits Center was too good to pass up. But yeah, obviously, we've already seen towards the end of issue 8 that the party gets sort of crashed by our villains from AIM, including some people we haven't actually seen on panel up till this point, who I'm having a lot of fun with. And this is sort of going on simultaneous to Mockingbird and Bucky being sort of off having their own adventure involving the Red Room, which I feel like I inadvertently wrote the best spy comic into like a backup for this story. I was like, man, I love these two together. I should have just written a comic about them. But that's going to be the big wrap up for this, and I'm excited about these last couple issues because I've been getting the final art from these, and they're really coming together fantastic, and I'm going to be excited to share those with folks. As for Nadia, I know for a fact she'll be in Champions for quite a while, and I know she's showing up in other places. She's been in several Avengers events in recent years, so I know she won't be going anywhere, even if Unstoppable Wasp isn't around. I'd love to see it come back. Obviously, it has done once already, and I know this is a book that sells much better in trades than it does in single issues. So hopefully get to see more of her and Janet in the future. As for me, starting actually in July, I am writing the Future Foundation, which for people who aren't familiar with that, is sort of Reed Richards' think tank of, at this point, teenage geniuses. They were younger when they started, but they've been off fixing the universe for a while. So they're all sort of teenage geniuses they're off on this quest to reassemble the Molecule Man, who was destroyed back at the beginning of this Fantastic Four run. So they've got to run through the whole multiverse looking for these pieces of the Molecule Man that have been scattered everywhere. And they're into some some wild adventures. Starting off in the first volume, we're doing a big jailbreak story. The first story is actually in the back of Fantastic Four. I believe it's 12 or 13, whatever the issue is that comes out in July. We have a 10-page backup story in there that explains Julie Power is featured very prominently on the cover of issue 1. And she was not with the team last time we left the team. And that the story in the back of Fantastic Four explains how she gets there. And then, starting in August, we'll have, an ongoing story with the Future Foundation, which I'm very excited about, because it is, as much as I love the smallness of the Wasp story that we've been telling, which is very intimate and very character focused. Future Foundation, it's full of characters that I love, is very big and very cosmic and sort of all across the multiverse. We're starting off with they've sort of got a guest professor in Professor Yondu, who is helping them break into and break somebody out of a space prison.
Nice.
Wow.
I've been loving the Fantastic Four, the current Fantastic Four run. I've read the last several runs. And we actually did an episode on the Molecule Man. And so I was a little sad when he was sort of blown apart, because I really come to enjoy the character. So the fact that is the focus of the Future Foundation run, I will definitely be adding that to my pull list when it comes out.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited about it, because we're getting the chance to do some fairly crazy stuff. Will Robson is going to be my primary illustrator on that. I think we're going to end up sharing the duties with a couple of other folks there, but it's very exciting, because we're both telling a new story using a lot of these young characters who in a lot of cases don't have a lot of history, but also characters like the Power Kids, who have been around since the 70s and have quite a bit of history, have been on several teams, and then a couple of the characters like Dragon Man and like Molecule Man and like a couple of the characters that we'll be introducing as the story goes on have a pretty deep history of Fantastic Four connections. So we're doing our best to make it both very much its own thing and very much tied into Fantastic Four history.
Cool. Well, I am eagerly awaiting that read. Any other creator-owned stuff or anything non-Marvel that you're working on?
Princeless is still ongoing. We're just finishing up, I think the 3rd issue of Volume 8 just came out. So there's one more issue of that, and then that'll be collected in, I believe, in July. And then the other Princeless book, Raven the Pirate Princess, is currently on its 3rd year. I think the 2nd issue of that the 2nd issue of year 3 just came out in Comixology. So the single issues of that only come out digitally, but then they're collected physically. So we should have the next physical volume of that probably in about July or August as well. So those are coming right along. I've been doing some more Sea of Thieves stuff with Titan, which is a lot of fun. It's a video game tie-in that is very loosely tied to a big, fun, open-world pirate game, which is always a good time. And I think those are the big things I have going on right now. I know, they're finally collecting the first arc of the Rainbow Bright story that I was doing over at Dynamite earlier this year. So hopefully people will actually get a chance to pick that up in bookstores and libraries and actually read it, because they've been waiting to see how the trade does to determine whether we want to do more or not.
Well, I'll drum up some business for you, because my wife is a huge fan. Rainbow Bright. That's something I can do for sure.
Awesome. Hopefully she loves it.
Yeah, Rainbow Bright is definitely hearkening back to my day, my childhood. My sister is a huge fan, so I will certainly mention that to her. And I have a 3-year-old niece, so we will we will pass that along so she can get in on that and experience Rainbow Bright, and my sister can relive her childhood through that book. So we'll definitely pass that along. Well, thank you, Jeremy, so much for taking the time to talk with us. And again, JRome58 on Twitter.
Yep.
And your Princeless Comic on Tumblr.
Princelesscomic.tumblr.com.
So that's going to about do it. Jeremy Whitley, writer of The Unstoppable Wasp, Princeless, and many, many more things. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It has been an honor and a privilege. And again, thank you for the amazing job that you have done writing Nadia and her fellow agents of Girl. And we strongly urge all of our listeners to go out, get those last 2 issues as they come out in the monthlies, and then go pick up the trade.
Yep.
Seriously, it is fantastic.
And I'm sure you've already heard it from the people you know in the mental health field already. But just to reiterate, you're doing a great job eliminating, one step at a time, the stigma associated with mental illness.
Thank you very much.
That was absolutely amazing. I am so incredibly grateful to Jeremy for taking the time to sit down and talk with us. You can check him out on Twitter at JRome58. And he's, please, as we said at the top of the show, go buy The Unstoppable Wasp.
Absolutely. I would also like to add, considering we hadn't done one of these types of interviews before, I think we did a decent job, but more importantly, we made sure that he got his message across, which I think he already does in everything he writes. But I think he recognized that we care just as much as he does. And I hope that we're able to do more of this, because this was really energizing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I have reached out to a couple of creators. Jeremy happened to be the first one to get back to me, but he is the first, but he will not be the last. We will definitely be doing this again. So moving forward, as we did not say in the top of the show, but you can check us out on social media at Twitter and Instagram at Capes on the Couch. We have an email address, capesonthecouch@gmail.com. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/Capes on the Couch, where you can subscribe at the $1, $3, $5, and $10 levels. And we have maxed out. I actually added, we have another $10 patron. I actually added an additional slot for our new patron. So many, many thanks to Ruby Nunez, our new $10 patron. Thank you so much, Ruby. And Ruby, as well as some of our other patrons, have made their recommendations for who they would like to see. I will give the caveat that we're going to try and do weekly episodes. However, as I don't know if you can hear in the background, my 2-month-old son is crying, and that makes it obviously a little more difficult. So I ask your patience that we may sometimes miss a week, but we're gonna try and stick to the weekly schedule. They may go every other week, or we'll do 2 weeks and then have a week break, whatever. It all honestly depends on when Doc and I can get together, because it's difficult for me to leave my wife with my son for the couple of hours that it takes for us to record, and then the additional time it takes for me to edit the episodes.
Right.
So
in addition to that, I've had some changes to my schedule that have made it a little more difficult. Having said that, I'm not going anywhere. I know some people were wondering what the heck happened to Dr. Issues on his Twitter account, but I will say that for mental health purposes, I stepped away from social media for a little while, but rest assured, I'm still dedicated to this, and we will continue as best we can to get you an episode every week if possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So having said that, our upcoming episodes, I'm not going to say next week but our upcoming episodes, to tie in with the X-Men Dark Phoenix, which comes out tomorrow, or this weekend, I should say, as of the date this episode is coming out. Our friend and patron of the show, Brian, has requested an episode on the relationship between Charles Xavier and Eric Lenscher, Magneto. So
I think that's going to be fantastic. And I'm going to take this opportunity to say, I apologize. Scott is not a dick, at least from the trailers I've seen.
And the other thing I will say, and you can please voice your opinions on this on the Twitter page or via email, for the skit, should I do Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, or should I do the upstate New York and German Jewish accent that are more appropriate to the comic backgrounds? So let me know what you think. Sound off if you want to hear my version of Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen's Xavier and Magneto, or if I'm going to hew it a little more accurately to the comics. So that's our next episode. And then following that one, our patron Ariel has requested Lex Luthor. And then our newest patron Ruby has requested to tie in with Jessica Jones season 3, Zebediah Kilgrave.
That's beautiful. I'm loving this lineup. I'm not saying that.
We got some heavy hitters coming up soon. We got some big episodes coming up soon. So many thank you to our patrons. You can, even though we're out of present level patron slots, you can still subscribe at the $1, $3, and $5 levels to show us some support and to continue to fund the show. And we're very, very close to being able to live stream these episodes. Just a couple more patrons and we will be live streaming.
That's right. And the thing about that live stream, I'm not going to be completely anonymous. You're going to actually see my face. You're actually going to be able to recognize Doc Issues, a.k.a. Naldo. Whoops, did I just drop something personal for the first time ever? That was not planned, but I did.
Wow.
So, yeah. At some point, this is going to happen. Not at the moment, but at some point, you're going to find out exactly who I am. I guarantee you that, because I've noticed that when it comes to mental health and when it comes to mental health awareness, anonymity is great to get things off the ground. But at some point, people like to really know the person. And I think that's fair. So I'm not guaranteeing it's going to be in the next few episodes, but at some point, you're going to learn exactly who I am as a professional.
Well, thank you. And we will let Doc do that on his own time. So once again, thank you again to Jeremy Whitley for taking the time to sit down and talk with us. Doc, anything else you want to add?
Just thank you for everyone who came back. It may have seemed like it was, 5 years or 5 hours or whatever, but don't worry. We're here where we're supposed to be.
There's no quantum time jumping here. So for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.